Hey guys, so welcome back. I decided to record this first segment outside on my front porch so I can soak up some of this amazing Chicago sun and heat that we are having this summer. So this morning I shared with you a little bit about the agenda for today, what I'm going to be sharing and what we're going to be talking about today. And so I thought that I would start by telling you guys a little bit about what endometriosis is. And so endometriosis is a condition which tissues that are similar to the lining of the uterus are found outside of the uterus, and it's very important to make the distinction that it is not the same thing as the normal lining of the uterus. It is cells. Although they act and behave similarly, they're very distinct in pathology and behavior. And so with these abnormal cells implant themselves throughout various areas of the body. Typically it had been thought of as a disease affecting just the pelvic and reproductive areas, but actually endometriosis can be found in any area of the body, and some reports say that it has actually been found in every area and organ in the body except for the spleen. And so these abnormal cells, they implant themselves all throughout the body. They can cause serious inflammation, excruciating pain and discomfort. They can sometimes cause organs to bind and fuse or stick together. And it can be a very painful and uncomfortable disease. And endometriosis has what's called a sister disease, or they sometimes call it a cousin disease, called adenomyosis. Now, it used to be thought that adenomyosis was simply endometriosis of the uterus, but current studies have shown that endo and adeno are actually two different diseases, whereas endometriosis are cells that are similar to the lining of the uterus, but adenomyosis is when the actual lining of the uterus breaks through and pushes through into the muscle wall of the uterus itself. It's a slight distinction, but it is a very important distinction to make. Now, both of these diseases have similar symptoms. Again, inflammation, chronic pain. A lot of times the symptoms are heightened around one's menstrual cycle and can cause excruciatingly heavy bleeding, the passing of very large blood clots, and it is one that can interfere with daily life activities. And so it's a very misunderstood disease. Right now, there's no definite cause of the disease, and there is no cure for the disease, although there are a myriad of treatment options, everything ranging from birth control therapies to hormonal treatments, to hysterectomy, to excision. And right now, excision is what's considered to be the gold standard of treatment for the disease. And so endometriosis is typically staged, although some doctors are doing away with staging, but it's typically staged from 1 to 4, and it is to correlate to the amount of disease present in the body and not necessarily the amount of pain. And what that means is that you can be stage 1 endometriosis and have very excruciating, debilitating pain. And some people can be stage 4 and have very little disruption to their daily life activities. So I was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis in about January of 2008. Initially thought that my appendix was ruptured. I was rushed to the emergency room only to find my entire pelvic and reproductive cavity was riddled with disease. The doctor said that it was one of the worst cases he had ever seen. She actually had ever seen. And though they couldn't tell me exactly how long I had it, the guesstimation was that based on the extent of the disease that I had it at least 10 years prior to diagnosis, which is important because on average it takes between 8 and 12 years for one to be adequately diagnosed with endo, because it mimics the symptoms of so many other similar diseases. We find that patients tend to be misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, or have their pain and symptoms dismissed as just a regular part of being a woman. So following my diagnosis in 2008, I had a very large, it was discovered a very large tumor, or what we call endometriomas, on the left side of my reproductive system, and the disease was so bad that I ended up losing my left ovary as well as my left tube, and had to have extensive excision surgery done. And while that surgery was successful, what I didn't realize at the time is that this disease doesn't go away. And the way the doctors had explained it to me was that there was something foreign in my body. They were gonna go in and cut it out, and then all would be well. And actually all was not well. And so 12 years later, I am still battling with this disease. Over the last decade or so, I've tried all types of treatments, from prescription painkillers, diet and nutrition changes. I've done birth control therapy. I've done Lupron injections. And anybody that knows me knows that I did not have a very good experience with Lupron. The side effects, the potential dangerous interactions was not thoroughly explained to me. And so having so little information is kind of what pushed me to go online and start researching and gathering information and education for myself. And that is when I stumbled upon a dozen or so different support groups on Facebook and other spaces in the internet. And that's where I just kind of delved in and started to educate myself and learn more and more about the disease for myself. And that's kind of how I started educating, starting with my family and friends, because just like me, they thought that the surgery fixed everything. And so I found myself having to explain and educate and share the same story over and over again about how no, surgery didn't fix everything. And even though I did have surgery, I still can't function on a daily basis. I can't go to the parties. I can't go to the cookouts because I'm in pain, and I could erupt into massive bleeding anywhere, anytime, or any place. And so out of trying to explain that over and over to family and friends, that's kind of how my life of advocacy began, because I got tired of sharing the same story over and over. I ended up speaking to smaller groups, and those smaller groups grew into larger groups. And about 2.5 years maybe after my surgery and diagnosis, I found myself putting on an expo of sorts, where I just kind of reached out to nurses that I knew, medical professionals that I knew, some of the therapists that I had worked with, to ask them to help me explain this to people. And so the expo took off very well, and then before I knew it, I was doing this on a yearly basis. And from there, as I learned and shared my story, people started reaching out to me, and I found myself sharing what I knew with other people, and then that turned into more calls and more emails, and before I knew it, I found myself being an advocate. And it wasn't something that I planned to do. It wasn't something that I even wanted to do, but you know, through the course of life, out of this very traumatic, painful experience in my life, I actually found a new calling of purpose, and I've been advocating for about 10 years now. And through the advocating and the expo, my book, Fighting Fiercely, came to be. When I was doing all of the expos, you know, I'm not a not-for-profit, I'm not a big organization, I didn't have, you know, sponsorship or support behind me. I was literally just reaching out to people that I knew and funding out of my pocket. And so people would ask me, like, is this going to be streamed? Is this going to be, you know, recorded? And at the time, I wasn't technology savvy. I'm still not a technology wizard, although I know a little bit more now than I did then. But that came the idea for me to write the book so that I could reach those people that were in other states and in other cities that couldn't attend the expo but still wanted the information. So I ended up writing the book so I wouldn't have to tell my story multiple times to multiple people, and so that people who were not in my city could get the information and the education that we were sharing every year at the expo. And so that's kind of how my life of advocacy with endometriosis began. And in the years since, I've partnered with the Chronic Disease Coalition, and that's been amazing. I mean, hey, look, I'm doing a takeover of their Instagram page, and it has allowed my advocacy to reach beyond the endometriosis community and expand into educating about other facets of other chronic illnesses, because what I've learned is that a lot of chronic illnesses, they share a lot in common with endometriosis. And so I'm happy to have been able to take my pain and turn it into purpose, and to have been fighting fiercely these last 10 years and sharing what I know and what I've learned about endometriosis. So that's kind of how I fell into advocacy, you guys. I'm going to come back a little bit later this afternoon to talk about how fighting fiercely came to be, like how I crafted and built and designed my advocacy around the concept of fighting fiercely. I'm so excited. I can't wait to share that with you guys. See you later.